Hi everyone! In today's video I'm going to be showing you how I've made the roof tiles for the back of the roof of this doll's house. So I have done a video previously about these roof tiles at the front, but by going through the process of making these roof tiles I learned a few things about how to make them so that they look a little bit more realistic than these ones. So these roof tiles are 12th scale slate roof tiles, and this is what I used to make them. So in terms of equipment, the cutting mat was really important because I didn't want to cut the table that was underneath. I also have a table protector underneath the cutting mat. To make my roof tiles, I'll also be using clay. So this is air dry clay and it's terracotta colour, but I could have used a different colour because I am going to paint the tiles. The paint that I'll be using to paint the tiles is acrylic paint, and its colours cobalt blue and burnt sienna, and I'll also be using some white acrylic as well. I use some baking paper to put the air dry clay on so that it doesn't stick to any surfaces. Obviously, I'm not going to be using this for baking, this is just the paper that I use for crafting. Some masking tape to keep the baking paper in place. I'll also be using a little bit of double-sided tape as well. A ruler to make sure that I get the right scale for my roof tiles. A rolling pin. Again, just like the greaseproof paper, this isn't going to ever be used for food, it is just for using for rolling out clay. And a pizza slicer, exactly the same, it will never ever be used for food. Some paintbrushes, some glue sticks and my hot glue gun. This looks like a lot of equipment, doesn't it, to make some little roof tiles. There's my glue gun, a palette for mixing my paint. Actually, later in the video I don't use this palette, I decide to use a piece of cardboard for my recycling instead, just because it was a bigger surface area to mix my paint on. And I'm not showing it here, but I also used some sandpaper and some nail files. I actually chose to use the nail files after the sandpaper because I found that they worked a little bit better. So this is a good time to say that this video isn't intended as a tutorial, it is a diary entry just to show you how I went about making my tiles. So obviously from showing you the equipment that I'm going to be using, I do use a pizza slicer, which is obviously sharp, and some other tools and materials as well, so please don't copy what I do, I'm not an expert, I just thought I'd show you what I've been up to make my miniature roof tiles for the back of my doll's house. So the reason I am making tiles for the back of the doll's house is because when I made the tiles for the front of the doll's house, I didn't make enough. Now, I'm actually quite glad about this, because by going through the process of making the tiles for the front of the doll's house, I now know what I need to do differently to make the tiles just how I want them. So, to begin, I placed my greaseproof paper over my cutting mat. I didn't stick the paper directly onto the mat, because I wanted to be able to move the mat when I went to do my second lot of tiles. So I only rolled out a small piece of the clay at a time because I was conscious that I didn't want it to be drying out whilst I was working on it. So I start with this piece of clay and then I repeat the process with some other pieces of clay. Next, I used my ruler to measure the tiles, so they were going to be 1 inch in height by ½ inch in width. And I used the pizza cutter to cut the tiles out. Now in my previous video, when I was learning how to make the roof tiles, I didn't use a pizza cutter like this, and it took me a lot longer to cut the roof tiles out, and they weren't quite as neat. The lines aren't as straight as I'd hoped, but it doesn't actually matter, because for my doll's house, it's meant to be an old warehouse that has been converted into an art gallery at the bottom and an apartment at the top. So to try and make this look like an old warehouse, I would like the tiles to vary in size a little bit and in shape, just to make it look as if they are very old tiles. Obviously, whilst I was cutting, I was being really careful to make sure that my fingers weren't in the way, and I only ever cut whilst the baking paper was over the top of the cutting board. The baking paper is there because it stops the clay from sticking, so it was doing a really good job at this. As you can see, this clay lifted away really easily from it. And the reason I was lifting this clay away was because at the edges there were some areas where there weren't complete tiles. So I was removing this to roll it back up into a ball of clay, which I could then roll out again to make some full-size tiles. So this is why I didn't stick the paper to my cutting board. I knew that I needed to make about 400 tiles for the back of my doll's house, so there certainly weren't enough in this section. So I needed to slide the cutting mat to the other side of my table, just like this, so that I could make some more. So I repeated the steps to make some more roof tiles. And obviously I went nice and slowly and carefully. I've increased the speed of this footage because this project actually took me around probably about 3 days to complete from start to finish. As you can see, the tiles aren't all even, they're not all the same size, but that's just how I wanted them. If I was doing a makeover on a more modern doll's house, I think I probably would try and make sure that the tiles were a little bit more even in size. I also wanted to make some ridge tiles to go along the top of the doll's house, so I used tiles of the same dimensions, but this time I just folded them over the top of a piece of greaseproof paper on the top of the doll's house. Now, these ridge tiles actually haven't worked exactly as I've wanted them to, and I will explain why and what I would do differently next time at the end of the video when I can show you them when they're finished. So I left all of my tiles to dry, and I left these for about 2 days. I actually thought I'd be able to come and work on them the next day, but they weren't quite dry, so I did leave them for 2 full days so that I could start painting them when I knew that they were completely dry. I didn't separate the tiles before I painted them. However, there were some that were already separate, and I decided to just stick these down to the paper with some double-sided tape, because this would help them to stay still whilst I painted them. So I used the colours cobalt blue and burnt sienna and also some white paint to make the colour of the tiles. I found that having equal parts blue to the burnt sienna worked quite well, and then I just used the white so that I could have a little bit of a variation in colour because I didn't want every tile to be exactly the same. I wanted to make it look like the slate tiles had a little bit of texture. So as I mentioned before, I mixed the colours on this piece of cardboard because it meant that I could mix a bigger quantity of paint at a time. My palette is a little bit smaller than this piece of cardboard. So once I was happy with the colour, I started to paint my tiles. For the tiles that were still together, that weren't separated, they didn't move around too much as I painted them, but as you'll see in a moment, I did take a second paintbrush just to keep them in place whilst I painted them. So just here, I'm just using the second paintbrush just to stop them from moving around. Of course, I could have put some double-sided tape underneath these tiles if I'd have needed to, but the paintbrush helped. I tried to use some different shades of grey on these tiles just to try and make the effect of it looking as if the slate had layers. I've actually noticed here that there are some tiles that aren't complete, so I'd forgotten to remove some of them, which is a shame because I could have used that clay to re-roll it and make some complete tiles. Now, whilst these were drying, I actually decided to go out with my mum and we went to look around the open gardens. We had some cake at the open gardens as well. So basically the open gardens is 2 weekends a year when people in the local area open up their gardens so that you can go and have a look. And you get a chance to go and see what their gardens look like and look at their plants. Some of the gardens sell some plants and also teas and coffees and cakes, and all of the money goes to charity. So there's a small ticket price as well that goes to charity, and it's just such a lovely event. I would be really curious to know if open gardens happen all over the world. I know that they do happen in different places in England, but yeah, it's just such a lovely event. So I thought that I would just film a little bit of footage of the plants that I saw whilst I was looking around the open gardens. It was a really nice little pause in between the dolls' housing to just get some fresh air and enjoy all of the wildlife and the nature. If you would rather skip ahead and just carry on watching the progress of the roof tiles, that's absolutely fine. I will pop some chapters in the description below so that you can go straight to the roof tiles section if you want to. As you can see, it started as a really sunny day, but then it did become really windy and it started to rain as well. Thankfully we were able to go into some greenhouses whilst it was raining, but eventually we did decide to just go and carry on walking because the rain was actually nice and refreshing. We liked this section. I don't know if you can really see in the footage, but this was full of wildflowers and they were really, really pretty. And there were lots of bugs and bees all over the flowers. And I bought some of these marigolds, and my mum bought some flowers too to take home and plant. There was a pink flower which my mum and I kept seeing, but we don't know what type of flower it was. I think it's coming up in this video next. Let me just see. Yeah, this one. So if anybody recognises what that plant was, sorry, I showed it for a couple of seconds. I didn't have much footage of it. It was really beautiful, and I would quite like it for my own garden. So yeah, if anybody knows, please do leave it in the comments. I love alliums because even after they've stopped flowering, I think they look really beautiful and add lots of structure to a garden. And I don't know what the yellow flowers were below these alliums, but I thought they looked really lovely together. I think these were probably alliums as well, but I've never seen them with red stalks, so I don't know what variety they were, or maybe they're not alliums, I'm not sure. And this plant was very interesting because we thought they looked like a Canterbury bell, but it looked a lot larger than a Canterbury bell, so we're not quite sure what it was. So again, if anybody knows, please do let us know in the comments. So when I returned home, the roof tiles were dry, but I actually thought that they'd dried a lot lighter than I expected them to. So I decided to mix up a little bit more paint and to paint over them without any white. Now, I didn't completely paint over them. I did leave some areas where they were the original shade because I thought that it helped to add a bit of texture. But actually, when this dried, it did look like I'd completely painted over them. So if I was to do this again, I would try and leave some of the different shades so that they're a little bit more textured. When they were dry, it was time to separate all of the tiles. Now, at this stage, when I made the tiles for the front of the roof, I then just stuck them to the doll's house. But I've added some steps here because I knew that I wasn't 100% happy with the tiles that I stuck to the front of the doll's house. because they looked a little bit sharp on their edges. They weren't sharp to touch, but they just didn't look quite right. So I decided to use some sandpaper, and then I moved on to using a little nail file to just smooth down the edges and especially smooth down the corners. This also helped me to remove a little bit of the paint where it had kind of peeled away when I'd separated the tiles from one another. Now obviously this was a step that did mean that this project took a lot longer than the first time when I'd made the tiles for the front of the doll's house. But I do think it's a step that was worth it. And in a way, I wish that when I'd made the original tiles, I'd stuck them to the back of the doll's house, because they were kind of my test pieces where I was experimenting. And I wish that these were the ones that were going on the front, because these new tiles were better. As you can see, some of the tiles did break as I was sanding them down. But this wasn't a huge problem, because I knew I was going to need some slightly smaller tiles for different places on the roof. So I still sanded these ones down and filed them down, because I knew that they were going to come in useful. Of course, this does mean that it's a good idea to make spare tiles, because I wasn't sure if I now would have enough tiles because so many had broken. So if I was to do this project again, I think I would make quite a lot more. But as it happens, I didn't have any more clay left, so I made as many as I could. Of course, because I'd filed down the edges of each tile, this then meant that some of the terracotta clay was visible. So I mixed up some more paint and went back and painted the edges of every single tile. Again, this was a step that I didn't do when I made the tiles for the front of the roof, but I think that it was a really important step to make these tiles look nice and neat and finished. As you'll see, I ended up getting paint everywhere. I needed to blend the paint in across the tile, because if I'd have just left it around the edges, I think because of the slight difference in colour in the shade of the paint would have been really noticeable, but with it blended in, it looked like it was meant to be like that. So again, this task took a couple of hours to do. Now I accidentally got a lot of paint on my hands. Obviously, if you are ever using paint, do read the information on the paint itself, because all paints are different and some of them you should use gloves whilst you're using. So yeah, just a little bit of advice there. Although as I said, this is not a tutorial, but I just wanted to let you know because I obviously did get a lot of paint on my hands. Whilst those tiles were drying, I used some of the leftover paint to just go and paint a few of the tiles at the front of the house, because there were little areas where I could see the terracotta clay because I hadn't painted the edges of those tiles. And when these ones were dry, I carefully collected them all together, and I kept the smaller tiles separate because I thought that they would be really useful to use at the top of my roof. I'll show you in a minute what I mean. So these tiles were all nicely painted now. Obviously they weren't painted on the back, but you weren't going to be able to see the back. But the front and the sides were completely covered so that you couldn't see the terracotta clay. As you can see, when I'd tried to get the paint off my hands, I'd also removed a lot of my nail varnish, so apologies that I now have just one nail painted. Now these were the original tiles that I used on the front of the roof. As you can see, a lot of them had a lot more texture. I decided not to add the texture to these slate tiles for the back of the roof. I think that if I was to make terracotta tiles again, I would make them textured, but I think the slate tiles looked more realistic with them being smooth. So I'd painted the doll's house roof a grey colour. I'd learnt from making my Tudor doll's house that it was best to paint the surface a dark colour so that if you had any gaps between the tiles, it wasn't as noticeable. Because when I made my roof for my Tudor doll's house, I'd left the roof a sort of, I can't remember what colour it was, I think it was maybe a light grey colour, and so any little gaps, that light grey was really showing. So yeah, I painted this grey, So it meant that hopefully if there were any gaps between tiles, it wouldn't be too noticeable. So I used my hot glue gun to pop the tiles in place. It was important to start at the bottom of the roof and work my way upwards because I was going to be overlapping the tiles. And obviously when I was using my glue gun, I was trying to be really careful not to get any of the hot glue on myself because obviously it's very hot. I've obviously increased the speed of this footage, but I did work really slowly just so that I could be really careful and also so that I could consider the size of the tile that I was placing down. Now, at about this point, I was starting to feel a little bit concerned because I felt like I was running out of tiles. This is how many tiles I had left, and I still felt like I had quite a lot of the roof to cover. If you want to play a little game, feel free to leave in the comments whether you think that I will have enough roof tiles or not. And also, I was running out of glue. So yeah, leave in the comments whether you think I managed to finish this project or whether you think I have to make more tiles and go and get more glue. You will find out the answer in a moment. So I used the tiny little tiles just at the top here. So these are the ones that had broken, but they were perfect for just lining the edge. And then I needed some of the full-size tiles to just go along the top part here. So this is where you're going to find out whether I had enough tiles or not. This is all that I had left. So all of these tiles are not full size and I needed full size tiles to finish off the roof. I was so close. This is probably the largest one that I had left, but that didn't cover the whole part of the roof that I needed to do. So instead it was time to start having a look through the tiles that I had left over from the front of the roof. Oh, I found this one there that was hiding under the pot. So I glued this one in place. And then I also noticed that there was one on the floor. My dad came round and was like, there's a tile on the floor, do you know? And I was like, yay, I can add that one to the roof. So I was so close to having enough tiles. But I went through this and I tried to find the ones that had the least texture, so the smoothest surface, that would match the most with the tiles that I'd been using. And when I'd selected the ones that I wanted, I popped them in place. So these two are a slightly different colour, so I might have to paint these to match the others. But actually I think overall it looks okay. So definitely if I'd have been a little bit more careful and not broken as many tiles as I did when I was filing them down, I would have just had enough. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so I only needed 5 extra. Now it was time to place the ridge tiles in place, and I mentioned earlier in the video that actually I would do them a little bit differently if I did them again. So as you can see, they don't fit as neatly as I'd hoped, and the reason for this is because when I had laid them over the apex of the roof, I'd done this at a point when there were no roof tiles on the back of the doll's house. So this means that now they're not sitting at quite the right angle. So if I was to do this again, I would wait to make the ridge tiles when all of the back of the roof was tiled, so I would know that they were exactly the right angle. I collected in all of the little strings of glue from the back of the doll's house, and there were some on the front as well, so I gathered them together. And actually I think I'm quite happy with this doll's house roof without the ridge tiles in place. Please let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think it needs some ridge tiles, or do you think it looks finished as it is? Thank you so much for watching. If you are new to my channel, I do have a playlist that is documenting this whole doll's house makeover. So I have some previous videos in that playlist, and each time I upload a new video about this doll's house, I'll save it into that playlist as well. So feel free to go back and watch if you'd like to. I'll pop a link in the description so that you can find it easily. So in the next few videos, I will be working on the inside of this doll's house, and I have a few jobs to do on the outside as well. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you've enjoyed the video. Please feel free to leave a comment. I read all of them and it's really lovely to hear from everybody. So I hope that you have a lovely week, and I will see you next time. Bye!